So Bethesda has recently released some backstory to the Starfield universe, and we actually get a timeline of some of the most important events of humanity. And when going over this timeline, keep in mind that as we start our characters in Starfield, we will start in the year 2033. So starting off this timeline, we start in the year 2050, where humans first arrive on Mars, and by 2100, humans are living in space. And I think this distinction is that humans first arrive in 2050, and maybe they send multiple missions to that planet in the subsequent years, but people aren't permanently living on different planets until 2100. And then we make a pretty big jump to 2156, where humans arrive in the Alpha Centauri system, which is 4.37 light years away from Earth. So it's taken 56 years to explore to Alpha Centauri. And then in 2159, the United Colonies are first established. So it actually only takes a few years after getting to Alpha Centauri for a union of all of these different colonies to be established. Then in 2160, New Atlantis is founded and becomes the official capital city of the United Colonies in 2161, and New Atlantis being in the system of Alpha Centauri. Then in 2167, Cheyenne is settled by Solomon Coe, who founds its first settlement, Aquila City. And then in 2188, Coe invites Volley to join Cheyenne in a new alliance, the Freestar Collective. The Freestar Collective is officially formed in 2189, and the Freestar Collective ends up being the other major power of humanity. And then in 2194, the United Colonies positions the star station called the Clinic in orbit around Dapala in the Nerion system. The unaffiliated peoples of the Nerion system see this as a United Colonies attempt to expand their borders and demand the United Colony to remove the Clinic. When the UC refuses, the people of Nerion vote to join the Freestar Collective, who mobilize to protect the system in 2195. So the United Colonies puts this star station called the Clinic in orbit around this planet. The people who are unaffiliated with anybody on that planet see this as the United Colonies trying to expand their borders. So these unaffiliated people instead join the Freestar Collective, who then mobilizes to help protect this planet from the United Colonies. But then in 2196, in response to the Freestar mobilization, the UC moves a fleet into the Nerion system, and the Freestar Collective responds in kind. And this is the start of the Nerion War. The Nerion War drags on as public sentiment sours. Finally, the Treaty of Nerion is signed by the UC and the Freestar Collective in 2216, and this ends the conflict. The term settled systems is also formalized in this treaty, and the settled systems basically just being any system that humanity is currently living in. And then in 2221, the Freestar Rangers are founded as an elite, protective, and investigative force dedicated to serving all citizens of the Freestar Collective. But then getting into 2275, Constellation is formed by Sebastian Banks. Original members include Cleo Bao, who is an accomplished physicist, Aja Mamasa, the youngest member and Sebastian's protege, Darius Andrus, who is a botanist and is a specialist in xenoflora, Bernadette Laurent, which is a wealthy heiress and adventurer, Everardo Gill, who's a former smuggler, and Kadri Toma, who is a biologist and physician. And then the lodge is built in New Atlantis to serve the needs and people of Constellation for generations to come. So this is the founding of Constellation. These are all the original members, all very accomplished people in their own rights, and then they also create the Lodge, which is basically their headquarters in New Atlantis. In 2305, Barrett joins Constellation, and I think these single pieces in the timeline where it's just certain person joining Constellation is meaning these people are going to be much more integral to our story in Starfield. But then in 2307, the Freestar Collective begins farming on the planet Bethesda in the Lunaris system. By 2308, the United Colonies claims that by establishing a colony in a fourth star system, the Freestar Collective has violated the Treaty of Nerion. Diplomatic talks break down, and the United Colonies lays siege to Vesta, killing anybody who stayed behind or was brought in to defend the colony. The Colony Wars officially begins. And then in 2310, Constellation comes into possession of their first artifact and tucks it away in the Constellation Constellation archives. It's also sounding like that one of the reasons they tuck away this artifact is because there's currently this massive war going on, and their headquarters is within the capital of one of these entities currently in a massive war. So it's seeming to me that they're trying to hide this from the United Colonies and anybody else who may want to use it as a weapon. And then in 2311, after several years of conflict, the Colony War effectively comes to an end when the Battle of Cheyenne, as a flotilla of civilian and military Freestar Collective ships take down the major ships of the UC Navy using hit and run tactics. So basically the Freestar Collective, using both civilian and military ships, takes down all of the most important United Colony ships. And then in 2315, the UC Vanguard is founded as part of the UC response to the Freestar Collective's use of civilian ships during the Colony War. The Vanguard is the UC's own civilian navy, relying on civilians using their own ships who pledge to protect the United Colonies and its interests. The ultimate reward for this service is citizenship in the United Colonies. So between 2311 and 2315 is when the Colony Wars basically ended. In this timeline, it doesn't specifically talk about there being an agreement to stop the war, but the UC does seem to be building up to make sure they're much stronger if they ever need to go against the Freestar Collective again. Then in 2319, Sarah Morgan becomes the youngest head of the United Colonies Navigator Corps, though it's a short-lived position as the division is shut down in 2320. Cast adrift, but still eager to put her training to good use, Morgan joins Constellation. And then in 2321, Walter Stroud, co-owner of Stroud Eklund, one of the Settled Systems' premier starship manufacturers, joins Constellation and becomes its primary financial backer. So again, a lot of these people that have their own section on the timeline that have joined Constellation seem to be people that are going to be much more important in our story. It's also pretty interesting that one of the co-owners of one of the most premier starship manufacturers is one of the main players within Constellation. But then in 2322, former Crimson Fleet pirate Vladimir Saul joins Constellation. Also pretty interesting that a very acclaimed pirate also was joining Constellation that is headquartered in the heart of the United Colonies. Then in 2325, Sarah Morgan becomes acting chair of Constellation, basically meaning she's the head of the organization now. Then in 2325, theologian Matteo Catri joins Constellation. Then in 2326, Barrett finds the original artifact in the Constellation archives and knows it must be special. So that first artifact that they hid away in their archives has now been found, and this seems like the event that's going to start the storyline that we partake in the game. Then also in 2326, after months of correspondence with Sarah Morgan, graduate student and gifted scientist Noel is invited to join Constellation. Then in 2327, Freestar Rangers Sam Coe and his daughter Cora join Constellation. Then in 2328, Andrea joins Constellation. Then again in 2328, Barrett convinces Constellation to purchase Star Station L868 and modify it to become a deep space scanner nicknamed the Eye. And this Eye was actually the first thing we were ever shown about Starfield. In that original teaser trailer, this was the small star station that we were shown. So it seems to have pretty big importance in the main story of the game. And my theory is that this is what we use to actually pinpoint general areas of all of the different artifacts we'll be looking for. But that is the end of the timeline. So this timeline is ending in 2328, and Starfield takes place, at least the start of Starfield takes place in 2330. So this comes right up to when we're gonna be starting the game as our created characters within Starfield. And I think this timeline gives us some pretty good bullet points to a lot of the major factions that are working within the Starfield universe, but a lot of this is pretty focused on all of the different members within Constellation, and then things like the artifact and the star station that we come to know as the Eye being very important starting points for the main story of the game. And I think a lot of these points within this timeline are specifically setting up major stories within the game, whether it be the major stories within Constellation, which is going to be what we're going to be following for the main campaign, or major stories with the factions such as the United Colonies or the Freestar Collective. So a lot of really interesting backstory within this timeline, and this just makes me much more excited to start into Starfield and see these big storylines play out. But that's all I want to go over, so thanks for watching.